So I would like us to take a pause on this conversation and come back, or I would like to step away for a few minutes to think about it.
Hey Josh, do you mind if I take a few minutes or even a day or two to just process what you just told? If I were to just accept that hook, line, and sinker, I might be going against my conscience. Do you mind?
Yeah.
Hello and good day. Welcome to another episode of The Consultant and the Coach. Josh is the consultant and I'm the coach. We're good friends, running buddies, book nerds, and Christians. We produce the podcast so we can apply our 40 years of consulting, coaching, business, and leadership expertise to popular and release books on business and leadership topics to help you live your Christian business life. So Josh, how are you today?
Yeah, doing great. How are you?
I am doing well. Just got back from the Philippines,
Yep.
So a little jet lag, but so far so good, man.
We're ready to go.
So what book are we doing today?
Yeah, so hopefully if those are listening, you may have caught the first episode last week, the interview with David Glasgow. We're talking about a book called Say the Right Thing by David Glasgow, Kenji Yoshino out of NYU. We think it's important. We actually reached out for that book because I think, like many of our clients, we're concerned about dialogue in our society. That's a bigger problem than just for businesses. But I think in particular, the businesses we work with are struggling with topics like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to talk about it in ways that are both meaningful. You know, there's many times these programs are viewed as sort of a waste of money. I think in other cases, there's this perception or reality where they seem to, you have to trade off doing it right with offending core personal and very closely held religious beliefs. And so how do we do that? So it's really a messy topic, and we thought, what a great topic to jump right in.
And really, we purposely changed our intro. We as Christians,
Yeah.
but then we live as Christians in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we do that?
Yeah.
Where we're not compromising our belief, but at the same time, we have to. You just don't want to. We have to be in the world, and we're engaging with people who are not Christians, or even within Christians. There's all sorts of different denominations and beliefs and this and that. So how can we be inclusive without compromising core beliefs? What does that look like?
Right. And I think that we had a great engaging dialogue with David. He was willing to get on with us, and I think on the surface, unfortunately, with the status of dialogue or lack thereof in our society, you might look at things we believe and things he believes, and you might think, well, those two could never have a good dialogue, which was why we wanted to jump in and show how we could. And so I think we did, and we'll talk more about the book today and hopefully be helpful to some folks.
Mm-hmm. So in your consulting, the book Say the Right Thing, overview, what's the book about?
Yeah, I mean, I think at a high point, the authors would say that it's really specifically targeting, how to have hard conversations around diversity, equity, or justice, actually, I think they say, and identity. To me, I think some of the main points from the book, even beyond that, are the importance of curiosity, right? Any expectations, in particular, we'll talk about lowering expectations, how to disagree well, how to have space for disagreement, how to communicate, how to apologize, because I think there's a posture of humility required in these conversations where, we're going to do our best to care for the people around us, including those in our businesses, and guess what? We're probably going to get it wrong. So let's err on the side of let's do our best, and then also go in with this expectation of, I'm going to screw it up, say the wrong thing, I'm going to apologize authentically, and have that enough humility to do that. And then
I want to go into curiosity.
Yeah.
So this is one of my favorite parts of the book, and I thought he did it really, really well. But I want to tie it back into Jesus. So sometimes one of the things he'll say, be curious. One of the things that made Jesus as great as he was is he was curious with everyone. He talked with everyone, social status from the top down to the bottom, and he was always curious about them. He never compromised. And so just because you disagree with someone, or let's say they come from the wrong perspective, he was curious. And we can engage with people that we disagree with, but be curious and authentic with them.
Yeah, and we just skipped right. We're just working on that new intro, so we forgot our scriptures. I'm going to interject here.
I knew that,
scripture.
so I was hoping that would go into the scripture.
It goes right into the scripture, Galatians 3:28, absolutely. So, a key point here, especially around, both pertains to curiosity, how do we lead businesses. I think it also informs the Christian perspective around identity, which is a very big topic in society right now. But Galatians 3:28 says, "There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important because there's this recognition that as we are Christian business leaders working with other Christians, we aren't differentiating based on any other factor than the fact that we both have Christ in us. I think, from an identity perspective, also, even when we're working with people who aren't Christians, we recognize that there is an identity and a calling on all of our lives that's bigger than the things we may choose to identify with in this life, whether we recognize Christ or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that Christians certainly have a very different view around identity because of the fact that we are willing to put away many of the world's definitions in pursuit of a identity in who Jesus is and who he's made us to be.
And we know that's life-changing.
Right, absolutely.
It's actually not only life-changing, it's world-changing.
Right. And it has been, right, for two millennia.
So the book, Say the Right Thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where I believe we can learn from people of different traditions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Would not hold to all of his beliefs or their beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, we can. And he was if you listen to the interview, he was a brilliant mind. He has done his work.
Absolutely. No, that was great. And I think one of the things, I think that we learn from him, but I also think is something for Christian business leaders to think about is in this realm of curiosity. I think one of the things that I have learned from this process to listen to is curiosity. I think you can be thinking about in how you ask and maybe don't ask the question around authority,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's one of the things I am thinking about is when I think about this from a curiosity perspective and listening to someone tell me their story, what's the authority in their life,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because again, back to this identity thing for Christians, the authority for us, and it's a lifelong pursuit, but the authority is effectively to be Christ, God within us, right? And God with us and for us, and that's the coming of the Spirit. And when I think we're able to kind of approach this posture of curiosity, humility, and wondering, I think it's also reasonable to understand and not be surprised by the fact that even if you put your authority in Jesus and the Bible and the church, as we tried to let David know early on, so he wasn't surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone's going to.
No.
Right, and so that's effectively has to be okay. Like in your own mind, while you would love for other people to take on that same authority, not be surprised and not expect people who have not made that same profession of faith to have an identity or an authority in their life the same. And so they're going to have a different perspective, right? Because authority, I'm realizing, makes a huge difference in the way someone will build their life and their priorities,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's one of the things I've been thinking a lot about in terms of as I approach curiosity.
Mm-hmm. And we had so many. I love this book because it forced the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
We've had hours upon hours upon hours of conversation regarding this book, and it ended up on that top authority. Because at the same time, we didn't talk theology with him, but we can guarantee if we were to drill down, what is your authority on this, or authority, we would land on Scripture.
Right.
He would probably land on something else. We didn't ask him that, but it's helpful for us to say things like that because we can at least know in our mind, okay, this is the supreme authority. Now, in my business life, or in our business life, we're in Washington State, which is way more liberal on the sphere of what's acceptable. Mm-hmm. Well, not in the topic of diversity, mm-hmm. way more liberal. We still want to do business in this state,
right?
So how do we do business in a way that glorifies God, maintains true to our faith, but at the same time we can still do business?
Right.
So what did we learn from the book in that sense, or did we?
I think there's a few things certainly to talk about. I think one of the things that I appreciated when you have these dialogues, and I think at least, I don't think we overtly said this in the interview, and again, I think we tried to express our apology to David that we could have taken 45 minutes, or we could have taken 2 or 3 hours for the interview.
Oh, yeah.
All the content we had to go through. So I told him, hey, I apologize, we're jumping in and out of topics so fast. We just want to get your take on these things, but we could spend hours with you, which was a compliment. Right, one of the things I think for these conversations is to lower our expectations. Right, I appreciated that concept in the book quite a bit. because I, was able to take a breath and I realize I do these conversations well. And I take a breath and I think, you know what? I have a difference of opinion on this particular topic or aspect of this topic. And I am not going to expect to change their mind. I may not even expect to find common ground, even though we'll try to. We talked about that, and we'll talk about that too, because it's kind of uncommon commonalities. But if I set my expectations low enough around another objective, around how do we work together, how do we make progress together, how do we communicate differently, versus, if I come in like with a really strong agenda of all these very fundamental things we have to agree on, it's never going to happen before we work together, then I think that's the first step here, is beginning to just temper your enthusiasm, right? For how much you can expect of the people you're working with. Now, obviously, you need to have, we've talked about this in past podcasts, right? There's layers of teams around you, and your closest team, your life team, like we're both in a life team, you obviously need to agree on a lot of fundamental things.
Oh,
People
absolutely.
you're really intimate with, but not extrapolate that out to 90% of the people you interact with.
And I think, and we talked about this on the interview with him, depending on the sphere that we're working, our expectations are different. So if you were working with me in my medical supply, it's all about, hey, how are we taking care of these customers so that they can get their wheelchair timely and paid for by insurance? That's what it's all about. On other things, let's say we're running, hey, how do we have fun running and get faster while we're at it? Understanding the sphere and what we're trying to do is, and what I appreciated, in the book, Say the Right Thing, it was a lot about open-ended questions. Let the other person share their perspective, and sometimes we can change their mind. Other times we can't, but let's learn in the process.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of learning that needs to happen. Another piece of lowering expectations, actually, I noted was about expectations and what they call off-ramps and communicating. And one of the things, actually, I wish we could have spent more time talking about was the off-ramps, because the way I interpreted their book was most of the time the off-ramps were these ideas where when you're in a conversation where you're feeling uncomfortable or you're starting to feel that anxiety about a particular topic that you don't know how to talk about rise, how do you sort of find your way out of the conversation? I think one of the things I took from
what's the definition of an off-ramp? I know.
Yeah, so my interpretation of the book's just definition, I don't have it in front of me, but it was basically, again, you're in a conversation and you need to take a pause from that conversation or a step away because you're not quite sure what to say. And there's a delicate way to do that so you're not shutting it down. There's also a delicate way to do it so you're not coming across in ways that are either rude or you're disagreeing or you might actually agree or vice versa. But there's also functional ways to get out of conversations.
And in the book, what I loved about it, he gave examples of off-ramps.
Right. Well, what I didn't see, tell me if I'm remembering this wrong, was what I was looking for was more verbal off-ramps, like to actually more verbalize it. And that's what I would have wanted to see.
And there were a few charts. Yeah. Here are examples of off-ramps.
Examples, but like it would be easier, like, hey, we're having a disagreement. And I say, Eric, I need to take some time to verbalize. I think it actually helps if you can say, hey, this is a really important topic. I'm glad we're talking about this. I need some time to think about it. So I would like us to take a pause on this conversation and come back. Or I would like to step away for a few minutes to think about it. Like, and be able to verbalize that with clarity, I think is
and I think what you said was perfect.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add from a coaching perspective is I would say what you just said to me, hey Josh, do you mind if I take a few minutes or even a day or two to just process what you just told? Because I'm not even sure what I believe. And if I were to just accept that hook, line, and sinker, I might be going against my conscience. Do you mind?
Yeah, right.
And unless you're a complete jerk, you're like, hey, I want you to think about it.
Yeah. No, and I think that's where you can authentically approach these topics of where you might have some disagreements, but you're not quite sure how to articulate them. You also, I think, struggle to not come across as, at least I struggle to not come across as agreeing with something I don't necessarily agree with, because I have fundamental beliefs that might be contrary to it, but I have a hard time articulating it in the moment. So anyhow, the off-ramps is a big thing I picked up on from the book that I think is a useful tool for leaders to think about in those hard conversations. Well, and again, they highlight kind of diversity, justice, identity issues, but I think these apply to lots of life conversations.
One of the reflections I had, the Christian perspective on this, let's go back 2,000 years. talking about diversity and inclusion and even changing arguments, I was thinking of Paul, the great missionary. You would see him go from culture to culture to culture. He would change how he communicates. His message did not change.
Right.
And yet, so we as Christian businessmen come into our business, or even I deal with all sorts of different customers. I have to change my message. Not that I'm changing, I still sell wheelchairs and oxygen, you name it, but how I talk to different people really depends on their situation. We can do that in life without changing our core values.
What did you think about, so speaking of communication, that was certainly a big topic in there. What did you think about the chapter 6 concept around the platinum rule? So for folks who haven't read it, just real quick, is the golden rule is a reference to Jesus, but also other religious teachings around do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think it's primarily Jesus that drives it. But it's not the only religious teaching on that topic, as I understand. But the platinum rule is, well, do unto others as you believe that they would want you to do unto them. What do you think about that?
I wrote in the side, I'm not sure I agree with this completely. And
tell me more. I don't either.
And the reason why is it's manipulative. So if I were to say, if you were to say, do unto others as they would want them, it's almost like you're manipulating them. And this is where, no, I'm going to hold on to Jesus, do unto others as you would want them to do to you. Because sometimes I might have to tell you some hard truth that hurts. I would be willing to hurt listen to this. I would be willing to hurt someone if it would help them long term. So let's say I have really bad breath. I would hope someone would say, Eric, you have really bad breath. You might want to brush your teeth. That would hurt me, but it would help me. And so you kind of have to figure out, don't tell me that nothing's wrong when it might hurt me in the long run. Does that?
Yeah, so I agree, and I have two other reasons why I
let's
disagree with that sort of premise. I think fundamentally the problem I have with, first of all, I find it somewhat offensive, speaking of bias and offense, with calling it the platinum rule, as I've thought about it, the reason it's always struck me as problematic is it sort of assumes, by naming it the platinum rule as sort of more valuable than the golden rule, is that the teachings of Jesus are now, those are nice, but we've now evolved beyond them. So we've gone from golden to platinum, and so we've actually evolved beyond Jesus, and that was nice foundation, but we don't need it anymore, right? So, so culturally I find it offensive, actually, as a Christian. The other thing I thought was interesting was, timing-wise, again, back to this authority topic, I was reading Psalm 36, and I won't read the whole thing, but Psalm 36, verse 1, second half of it says, there is no fear of God before their eyes. And so I think as we think about the platinum rule, if we're trying to think about just doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, or doing unto others as you think they would like you to do unto you, I think then done unto them, there's this recognition that if you are working with someone who's not a Christian, and you're working with someone who doesn't share the same authority set that you do, and they do not have a fear of God in their eyes, why would you do what you think they would want you to do? Because what they would want is not going to align with your values, simply because they don't actually fear the same God you do, right? And so from an authority perspective, I also have a problem with the platinum rule, because it potentially has you violate your own values,
which we can't do. We should
even in the most loving way. Like, I'm not talking hatred, I'm not talking bigotry, I'm not talking, it's from a core religious belief. So those are the two reasons I was helpful topic to talk about, for sure, but I would not want to use that specifically.
And this is where I think it's very beneficial for Christians to go through non-Christian books, because we need to figure out both sides. In terms of, hey, we can agree over here to be curious together, but we're going to disagree peacefully over here. And I think if we were to press him on that, he would actually be okay with that. If we could articulate, hey, we're going to disagree on the platinum rule because of our deeper seated beliefs over that. And I think he would actually be okay with that.
No, I would agree to disagree. And I think, and again, the fundamental piece behind it is a respect, right? Communicating respectfully, right? I think is the underlying intention there. That I think there would be a lot of commonality around. Like, let's agree respectfully. Let's not drive it through some language of fear or hatred or other things that are both they would advocate against, and as Christians we would advocate against, right? Not wanting to do those things. So I think there's a lot of commonality there. We're coming up on time here. What do we got up? What's next? What do you think? Where do we go with this book next?
Where we go next is business application. So
Yeah,
this is
absolutely.
this is the book review, and what's next is business application, because where we're at is, hey, this is a podcast for Christian business leaders.
Mm-hmm.
You might work in a Christian business,
Yeah.
where even then you still have to be aware of the multiple denominations of Christians within your Christian business.
Right.
But even then, if you're working in a business that serves non-Christians, how do you talk to them? So that, hey, that's next, and it's even more important. What does that look like?
Right.
So hey, next week is Christian business application from the book Say the Right Thing. You know, what do we grab onto? What do we hold on to? What should we push away? And it's it'll be good.
Absolutely. Come back and join us.
Yeah, come back and join us next week. And in the meantime, hey, go to theconsultantandthecoach.com, reach out to us, or hey, wherever you're listening to this video, send us a comment. What do you think? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? And we'll be curious about your comments.
Also, last comment, if someone has it, we are working and considering producing discussion guides for your teams.
Mm-hmm.
If that's something that interests you, shoot us an email so we know that's of interest. We can put something together for you. Send it out.
Absolutely. Okay, until next week.